I had just returned home after a 16-hour shift. My uniform still smelled of sweat, smoke, and adrenaline. The kind of day that reminds you why you chose this job, and why it's also tearing you apart. Being a SWAT commander wasn't just about tactics and danger, it was about the unspoken promise that no matter how bad it got, you were the last line of defense. For others, for yourself. I tossed my gear bag on the floor and sank into the sofa. My dog, Ranger, lifted his head, but didn't bother to move. We were both exhausted. I glanced at the clock, it was almost midnight. I hadn't eaten anything real since the previous morning, but I didn't care. I just wanted quiet. Peace. Maybe a little sleep before another call, dash out, but peace never stays long. The knock at the door was soft at first, like someone was trying not to wake the neighborhood. I thought I imagined it. Then, a second knock more. Urgent. I stood up slowly, my body aching with every step. Ranger stood now, ears perked, his body tense. I opened the door and saw her, a woman, maybe mid-30s, blonde hair, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked frantic, shaking, hands trembling as she held them out. "Please," she gasped. "Please help me. They're coming. My boyfriend, he's crazy, he's trying to kill me. He has a knife." I stared at her, my mind shifting gears. I wasn't wearing a badge now. No vest, no gun in my belt. But that instinct, the one that never shuts off, flared up immediately. I pulled her inside and shut the door. "Sit down. I'm calling the police," I said, already reaching for my phone. "What's your name?" She shook her head quickly. "No, don't call them. He said he'd kill me if I called the cops. Please just let me stay. Just a few minutes." It didn't sit right. My house was in a gated community. Cameras at every entrance. The only way she could have come in was if she'd been let in or was already inside. Still, I let her sit. I gave her water. Ranger stood by the door, unmoving, quiet but alert. She kept glancing at him like she was unsure whether he was friend or threat. I made the call anyway. Not 911. I had my own line to dispatch. Quiet code. I told them what I had. No sirens. Just eyes. Then, as I hung up, something in her shifted. She stopped shaking. Her breathing slowed, and she asked a question no real victim ever asks. "Do you have cameras in this house?" I paused. "Why?" "No reason. Just safety. You know." I didn't answer. Instead, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway toward my bedroom, pretending to grab a blanket. Once out of sight, I checked my safe. Still locked. I grabbed my personal firearm and slid it behind my back, concealed under my shirt. My mind was racing now. Her story didn't make sense. Her clothes weren't torn. No blood, no bruises, not even dust on her shoes from running. I walked back into the living room just in time to hear a small click near the back door. Ranger heard it too. He growled. I moved toward the window and saw them, two shadows creeping along the side of the house. Dressed in black, no hesitation. One held a crowbar. The other, what looked like a handgun. It wasn't just a setup, it was a breach. They had timed it. They thought I was just another tired guy. But I was a SWAT commander, and they'd just walked into my war zone. I turned back to the woman. She saw the look in my eyes, and in that moment, her fake tears vanished. Her face went flat, expressionless, cold. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" she whispered. "You made a mistake," I said quietly, "a very big one." She reached into her jacket, fast, but not faster than I moved. In seconds, I had her disarmed and on the ground. Ranger growled, circling her as I secured her hands behind her back using cable ties. I kept near the entry drawer. The sound of breaking glass came next. They were in, but they weren't ready for what they walked into. The house was dark, quiet, but I knew every inch of it. Every blind spot, every echo point. I positioned myself behind the kitchen counter, low and silent. Ranger remained in the hallway behind me, waiting, watching. The first man came in with a flashlight, scanning the living room. The second followed, slower, holding the weapon like he'd used it before. I let them walk in fully. I let them feel safe. Then I spoke. "You've got 5 seconds to drop the weapon and lie down." Panic. They froze. The man with the gun turned and aimed toward my voice. But he was too late. I fired one shot into the leg. He dropped like a sack of bricks, screaming. The other tried to run. I fired a second warning shot near his feet. He dropped to the floor, arms up, crying. "Don't shoot. Please, don't shoot." It wasn't my idea, it was her. I stepped forward, weapon raised but steady, and secured both of them. Then I made the second call. This time, sirens would come. By the time backup arrived, the story was unraveling. The woman was part of a team targeting homes in wealthy neighborhoods. They faked domestic emergencies to gain entry. Then, while the victim was distracted, the others broke in to rob the place. What they didn't know was who they picked that night. I gave my report, detailed and clean. My fellow officers shook their heads in disbelief. "Damn, sir," one said, "they picked the wrong house." "Every house is the wrong house when you bring violence," I replied. They laughed. But it wasn't a joke. Later that night, as I sat again on the couch, the weight of it all hit me. The calm before the storm had passed. Ranger laid beside me, head on my foot, finally relaxed. It could have ended differently. It almost did. And yet, this was just part one of the story, because what they said during the interrogation changed everything. I moved quietly, like a shadow inside my own house. Every creak in the floor was memorized over years of tactical movement, and I avoided them with muscle memory. I pressed my back against the wall and slid toward the kitchen. I could still hear them low whispers, maybe 2 or 3 voices, moving toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. That confirmed it. They weren't amateurs, they were smart. They hadn't gone straight for the valuables or the living room. They were moving methodically, clearing the house just like we do during operations. This wasn't some petty robbery. This was coordinated. My instincts flared. I had been in situations like this before: ambushes, setups, rooms where one wrong step meant the end, but never in my own home. I had no armor, no rifle, no team on comms. Just my training, my environment, and my will. I grabbed a small steel flashlight from the drawer near the dining area. Heavy, solid, could double as a weapon. Then I crouched low and moved down the hallway. They had flashlights too. I could see the faint sweep of light through the gap under the door to the master bedroom. I paused. I couldn't just barge in. I needed to know how many there were. I needed an angle. I stepped into my son's room, which connected to the other side of the hall, through the bathroom. Slowly, I through the connecting door, cracked it just enough to see the faint shadows moving inside the master bedroom. 2 figures. One at the window, looking outside, probably the lookout. The other was by the dresser, going through the drawers. I waited for a signal, something to confirm the third, and I got it. A voice came through a small radio, clipped too. The man's vest, perimeter clear, no movement. So they had someone outside watching for lights or approaching cars. That made 3, possibly 4, if they had a getaway driver. These weren't kids. These were trained, maybe ex-military, maybe private security, maybe someone who had done recon. But why my house? Why tonight? My eyes scanned the room. I knew, every inch of it. I also knew that inside the hallway closet, behind the coats, there was a reinforced safe. They were looking for it. Or maybe they already knew. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. This was personal. Someone had tracked me. Someone knew who I was and had made a plan. My mind raced back. Could it be linked to that raid in Baltimore? Or the sting in Tucson where we intercepted a trafficking ring? Or was it someone local I had crossed paths with? I didn't have time to dwell. They were moving fast, and I had a narrow window to act before they found something they weren't supposed to. I reached for the fire extinguisher in my son's closet, heavy enough to blind them momentarily if used right. I waited for the right moment. The lookout turned away from the window. The other guy was focused on the dresser. I slid into the room in a blur and let the extinguisher burst with a loud hiss. White mist filled the space. Coughing, swearing. One of them turned toward me, half blinded, and I swung the flashlight with everything I had. He dropped hard. The lookout reached for something, maybe a weapon, but I tackled him to the ground before he could draw. We wrestled, limbs crashing into furniture, breathing heavy, each second stretching. But I had the upper hand. Years of drills, of physical training, of knowing exactly how to shift weight and apply pressure, it all came to life. I locked his arm behind his back and forced him down. 1 breath, 2, silence again. I tied them both with extension cords and belts. Now came the risk. The one outside. I had to lure him in. I switched off the lights and cracked the front door, open just enough to make it look like a mistake. Then I waited. A few minutes passed. Then I saw him approach, hood up, walking slow, cautious. He reached the door and stepped in. Before he could call out, I had moved behind him and locked him in a chokehold. No unnecessary harm, just enough to put him down without a sound. He dropped. I locked the door behind me and finally took a breath. But I couldn't relax. Not yet. I called my team. Not 911. Not the precinct. My personal circle. The ones who had my back during operations. I gave them the code. Immediate extraction. Possible retaliation. House breach confirmed. Within 15 minutes, I had 2 plain SUVs outside. Unmarked. Standard protocol. They entered quietly, checked the perimeter, confirmed my report, and secured the scene. The men were taken not to the local station, but to an off-grid holding location where high-risk interrogations took place. It wasn't official, but it was necessary. Because this was bigger than a burglary. I felt it. These men weren't here for money or electronics. They were here to send a message, or retrieve something specific. One of my men brought in a laptop. They began scanning the equipment on the intruders. Hidden GPS trackers, burner phones, a photo of my family tucked inside one of their jackets. It chilled me. This wasn't just a hit. It was surveillance. It was psychological. Someone was watching for a while, learning my habits, my weaknesses, and they'd chosen tonight for a reason, but they had failed. And now, we had them. Interrogations began that same night. The first one broke quickly. He was young, not more than 25. Hired muscle. Didn't even know who I was, just followed orders. But he gave us the name of the one who paid them, a middleman, offshore accounts, ties to a private firm operating in Africa. That was enough to start the trace. We moved fast, burned no time. Within hours we had frozen the funding channels and tracked the originating signal. It led back to a name I hadn't heard in years, someone I thought was dead. An ex-operative, one we had disavowed long ago for crossing lines, even we couldn't accept. I remembered his face, cold, precise, ruthless, and now he had come back from the shadows. And worse, he had come for me. This wasn't over, this was only the beginning. The hallway was still, no echoes of panic, no footsteps, just silence, the kind that makes even a seasoned SWAT commander feel like something isn't quite right. I scanned every inch of the wall, floor, and ceiling, noticing how meticulously they avoided any broken objects, any clear trail. This wasn't a rushed break-in, it was deliberate, quiet, and methodical. I reached for my radio and whispered, "Bravo 2, report status." A pause, then crackling. "All clear at rear exit." No visual contact, nothing on motion. My gut churned. They're either inside and waiting, or already out with something we don't even know was here. That's when it hit me. They hadn't gone after valuables. No smashed safes, no broken drawers, no electronics missing. They didn't care about jewelry or cash. They came for something else, something specific. I turned to my wife. "Did you notice anything off before we got home? Anyone watching the house recently? Any strangers?" She shook her head slowly, still visibly shaken. "No, nothing." But she paused. 2 days ago, someone dropped off a package. No return address. I thought it was one of your deliveries." "What did you do with it?" I asked sharply. "Left it on your desk." I rushed to the home office. The desk was clean, not messy. Clean to clean. Cleared. Every file, every laptop. My secure drive, gone. They hadn't broken in for stuff. They came for intelligence. My hands tightened into fists. That drive didn't just contain notes. It had blueprints, ongoing operations, entry strategies, and a few case details that were classified. My blood ran cold. This was more than just a robbery. It was a calculated breach on someone with inside knowledge, someone who knew I was SWAT. I called it in. We triggered an internal breach protocol, scrambling data across the system. But even so, if the data was copied already, we were compromised. An investigation began immediately, and I was pulled into a debrief with internal affairs. They asked everything: how I stored files, who had access, whether I had been threatened before. I gave everything. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't random. I started connecting dots. There were only a few people who knew what was on that drive, only a few who knew the upcoming operations. Only someone with a badge could even recognize its value. That narrowed the suspects down. But it also made the situation more dangerous, because if it was someone inside, they knew the rules just as well as I did. They could cover their tracks, access reports, and delay investigations. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I set up an independent trail. Every backup, every login, every signal ping from my network. That's when something interesting popped up. 2 days ago, before the break-in, there was an unauthorized remote login into my private file server routed through a public network, masked through multiple IPs, but one signal slipped. It originated from a small warehouse downtown, registered under a shell company that had been inactive for months. I didn't wait. I grabbed my gear, told no one, not even my closest allies. If there was a chance I could retrieve that drive and get answers, I had to move before it was gone. Again, when I arrived at the warehouse, it looked deserted. Rusted shutters, dusty glass, no movement. But SWAT training teaches you one thing, above all: never trust your eyes, trust your training. I went in from the side, carefully disabling a motion sensor hidden near the doorframe. Inside, it was the opposite of deserted. Slick computers, surveillance feeds, a desk with what looked like blueprints for multiple city buildings. And in the center, my drive, connected to one of their systems. They hadn't finished copying. I had 2 minutes. I pulled out my phone and activated the emergency beacon. Had to move fast. I disconnected the drive, pocketed it, and began gathering photos. Every name on the documents. Every face I could see on the live surveillance feed. But I wasn't alone. A voice came from behind me. "You're not supposed to be here, Commander." I turned. Man stood by the stairs, calm, and holding no weapon, but his confidence screamed power. "I came to retrieve what's mine," I said coldly. He smiled. "That drive was never really yours. It belongs to everyone now." "Who are you working for?" He chuckled. "You already know the answer to that. But you're not going to like it." Then, suddenly, he pressed something in his pocket. The lights dimmed. An alarm blared. I had to escape, not just with the drive, but with my life. I ducked behind a row of crates, dodging a sudden burst of gunfire from the catwalk above. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't alone. I rolled to the left, fired a flashbang, and used the chaos to reach the exit. Behind me, I could hear footsteps chasing. Voices yelling, but I made it out. The moment I cleared the building, my team swarmed the area. I had activated a trace beacon from my belt. The building was surrounded, and multiple arrests were made, but that man, the one who confronted me, was gone, vanished, disappeared like he was never there. In the aftermath, we discovered something chilling. The warehouse was being used as a data laundering facility. They weren't just stealing information, they were redistributing it, selling tactical operations to the highest bidder, terror groups, mercenaries, even rogue private forces. My drive had been just one of dozens they had accessed. We shut it all down, retrieved what we could, but the damage was partially done, and that man, still at large. The agency opened a wider investigation. I was cleared of negligence, but the scar remained. I had underestimated how deep corruption ran, how dangerous it was to be someone who lives by duty in a world full of betrayal. But that night taught me something. You can't always stop the first blow, but you can damn well make sure it's the last, and I swore, whoever faked that emergency, whoever tried to breach my life, would regret it, because now, I wasn't just a target, I was hunting them. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. They were organized, too organized. The kind of coordination they used was something I had only seen in highly trained units. This wasn't a random break-in. It was strategic, deliberate, and it wasn't just about getting inside the house, it was about testing me. Testing how I would react. I spent the next few days reviewing everything. Security footage, entry points, camera blind spots. And I noticed something that chilled me too. The bone one of the intruders looked familiar, not because I knew him personally, but because his movements, the way he held his weapon, even how he communicated with the others, It resembled SWAT training. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a regular group of burglars. This was something bigger. I called in a favor from an old colleague who now worked with Homeland Security. He ran facial recognition on the intruders. What he found confirmed my worst fears. One of them was an ex-military operative, dishonorably discharged, known for contracting with private security groups, the kind that operate outside legal boundaries, mercenaries. Why would mercenaries stage a fake emergency to get into my home? The answer came faster than I expected. I got a call on a secure line. No caller ID, just static. And then a voice, calm, measured, professional. You're good, better than we expected. Who is this? I demanded, pacing my office. A friend, or at least, not yet an enemy. That line stopped me. What do you want? I asked, my hand instinctively moving to the drawer where my Glock rested. We needed to know if you were still sharp. Still, the man who trained half the West Coast SWAT units. I didn't respond. I waited. You'll find a package at your door tomorrow. Read it. If you refuse, that's your choice. But know this, someone else will accept, and they won't be as careful. The call ended. I stood frozen, mind racing. What kind of sick game was this? True to their word, the next morning, a plain brown envelope was left at my door. No address, no postage. Inside was a file marked redacted across the top and a black USB drive. Against my better judgment, I isolated the drive and ran it on a clean air-gapped laptop that had contained a video, grainy footage, children being moved through a remote jungle compound. Armed men patrolling, no flags, no markings, just fear and control. The kind of footage you don't see on the news, but that intelligence agencies quietly pass around behind closed doors. Under the video was a message: they're real, and they're growing. We need someone who understands urban tactics. Someone who can fight in the shadows. Say yes, and we begin. It was a recruitment, but for what? That night, I barely slept. My instincts screamed danger, but something deeper pushed me. A sense of duty, maybe guilt, maybe pride. But I knew I couldn't ignore this. The next morning, I replied, using the instructions they had hidden in the folder, an anonymous upload with a one-word message. Yes. Everything changed after that. 2 days later, I was picked up. Not by police, not by any agency I recognized, but by a black SUV with 0 plates and a driver who didn't speak a word. We drove 4 hours into the mountains. No cell reception, no GPS. We arrived at what looked like an abandoned mining facility. But inside, it was something else, a fully functional operations center. Dozens of screens, tactical gear, maps, live feeds. And then I met him. He went by the name Mason, tall scar on his left cheek, former CIA field operative, now running something off-grid. You weren't supposed to be contacted, he said, but they jumped the timeline. So here we are. What is this? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, just walked me into a room filled with screens showing people from all over the world, some looking terrified, others being trained. We're not a government unit, Mason said. We're not mercenaries. We're something in between. We handle the threats that slip through the cracks. The ones no one wants to admit exist. The footage from the jungle compound came back on the screen. This is real. They're trafficking not just people but information. Blackmail, state secrets, biodata. I stared. And you want me to do what exactly? Train them, he said. Not the enemy. Our people. civilians with skills, ex-military, whistleblowers. We need to turn them into a team. Why me? Because you don't flinch. You didn't flinch when they broke into your home. You adapted. And because you've seen both sides of this world, law and chaos. I didn't answer right away. I needed time, so I was given 24 hours. I used that time to walk around the compound, meet some of the so-called recruits. One was a former hacker from Eastern Europe. Another was a nurse from Sudan who had witnessed warlords firsthand. They weren't soldiers, but they were survivors, and they were hungry for purpose. That night, I stood alone, overlooking the mountains, thinking about how it had all started with a fake emergency at my front door. What if I had ignored it? What if I had treated it like any other home invasion? They wouldn't have chosen me. Maybe that was the point. Maybe all of it, every piece, was a test. The next morning, I gave Mason my answer. I'll train them, but I do it my way. He smiled. That's the only way I expected, and just like that, I was no longer just a SWAT commander. I was leading something I couldn't even name, and the war, hadn't even begun. The man's voice on the radio was calm but firm. Copy that. Suspect is in motion. Do not engage until confirmation. I responded with a brief, understood. My breathing slowed. I wasn't just a SWAT commander anymore. I was the bait, the decoy, and the one most likely to get hit first. I moved toward the back hallway, staying low, aware of every creak under my boots. The power had returned, but the flickering lights overhead only made the shadows more dangerous. I knew every blind spot in that house. I had built them into the training simulations. I had practiced every scenario except this one. Just as I crossed the kitchen, I caught movement, a reflection on the refrigerator door, a silhouette in the living room window. I turned without a sound, heart pounding like a war drum. There were two of them now, one near the hallway and another just outside on the patio. I couldn't be sure which one was the leader, but something told me the man on the patio wasn't just backup. He was watching, observing, possibly the one calling the shots. The glass broke, not in a loud shatter, but a precise, tactical break, slice and peel, just like we did during silent entries. They were trained. This wasn't some random group of burglars. These were people who had learned from us. Or maybe from someone inside. That realization hit me harder than any punch. Someone had leaked tactics. Someone had mimicked us down to the last detail. I retreated to the hallway mirror and tilted its slightly old trick. Through the angled reflection, I saw the one inside step in, low crouch, weapon drawn. Not a firearm, a stun baton. Silent, effective, non-lethal unless directed at the chest for too long. He was heading toward my son's room. I acted, not waiting for backup, not thinking about protocol. My family was the mission now. I launched myself from the hallway, sweeping low and catching him behind the knees. He fell, but fast he rolled and raised the baton. I blocked with my arm and took the hit to the bicep. Burning pain, like lightning through my arm. But I held on. Slamming his wrist against the corner of the dining table, I heard the baton clatter away. One elbow to the throat, and he went down. Then came the gunshot from outside. Shattered window. My instinct kicked in and I ducked, rolling under the table. A second shot aimed not at me, but the hallway wall. A warning or a message. Either way, they were trying to flush me out. Alpha, entry team, is compromised. We're inside. Suspect number 1, down. Possible second shooter, outside. Requesting breach from north entrance. I said into my comms. Low, but urgent. Copy that. Go silent. 2 minutes. The reply came. That was all I needed. I crawled across the floor and dragged the unconscious intruder into the closet. He was still breathing, dazed but alive. I didn't care about him anymore. My eyes were on the door, on my son's room, on the figure that had just appeared in the hallway, this one wearing a mask. Not tactical, not military, more personal. Modified. Ski mask, red stripe down the center, like he was trying to be remembered. We locked eyes. He pointed the gun straight at me. Don't move, he said calmly. I did the opposite. I lunged sideways, knocking over a chair to distract him, and rolled into the next room. A shot echoed, missing by inches. I kept moving, zigzag, unpredictable. I'd taught my men that hesitation kills. That hesitation was death. I lived by that rule now. Suddenly, the flashbang exploded in the hallway. My backup had arrived. The intruder screamed, blinded and disoriented. I charged, tackled him mid-step, knocking the gun free. We wrestled on the floor. He was strong, experienced, but I was desperate. My knee found his ribs. He grunted. My fist found his throat. He choked. My hand found the zip tie from my belt. I wrapped it around his wrists in seconds, tightened it with every ounce of force I had left. When the team finally swarmed in, weapons drawn, I was already on my feet, checking the rest of the house. My wife was with our son, locked in the bathroom, safe, shaken, but alive. We did a full sweep, found a van parked 2 houses down, unmarked, but inside, we discovered maps, photos of me, my family, our routines. They'd been watching for weeks, planning, This wasn't a random break-in. This was a targeted, premeditated hit. The man in the red-striped mask didn't speak for hours. But when he finally did, he said one thing. "You weren't supposed to be home." Those 6 words chilled me more than the bullets. They meant he knew my schedule, knew when I left for work. Someone fed them my routine. It confirmed my fear. Was personal, inside information. Days later, we found the connection. A former recruit kicked out for misconduct 2 years ago. Bitter, angry, and apparently, still watching. He had trained with us long enough to learn our tactics, and sold those tactics to people willing to use them against us. They wanted money, leverage, but most of all, they wanted to humiliate someone like me, a commander who trains others to prevent the very thing that nearly destroyed his own family. I learned something that night. Preparation isn't just about drills and weapons. It's about instincts. It's about trust. And sometimes, it's about facing the same tactics you once taught, now used against you. My son still asks me why I was so calm that night. I tell him the truth. I wasn't. I was scared. But fear, when used right, is fuel. We moved houses after that. I tightened every security gap, trained my family in every scenario. I even created a new branch of training for the department, based on that night's events, reverse tactical defense. Preparing officers for situations where the enemy uses our own methods. Because in the end, I wasn't just defending my house, I was defending my identity, my integrity, my family. And when it's personal, you don't wait for backup. You become the shield. The storm had passed, but the lesson stayed. You can fake an emergency. You can mimic tactics. You can even plan a flawless entry. But what you can't fake is what a real SWAT commander becomes when his family is threatened, and that's a line they should have never crossed.